Great to be joined again in 2023 by Michael Whitehead, the head of Agribusiness Insights at ANZ. Michael, how are you going today?
Very well, Ricky. Good to talk to you again.
Well, you and I, we managed to have a bit of a holiday, but the farmers, they certainly didn't, especially if they were on the wheat and barley front. They were cropping and harvesting like you wouldn't believe.
Absolutely, totally agree. In fact, I was driving across some of the cropping country in Victoria well after Christmas, when a lot of it would normally have been off, and the headers were still out, and the field bins were still out, and there are some parts where it's even still going now.
Absolutely, and usually you think in the old supply and demand metric, when there's a whole lot of supply coming on or expected, prices take a big dip, but that's not necessarily what we've seen towards the end of 2022. How are things looking on the market front?
Look, the market's going to be interesting going particularly into 2023 because a lot of it's still impacted by these global factors out there. And a big part of the spike we all know last year was to do with Russia. And everybody had these fears that there'd be nothing coming out of Russia and nothing coming out of Ukraine. And that pushed prices of everything up. The market absolutely got over that fear, and what's looking interesting at the moment globally is that production out of the Northern Hemisphere might be stronger than was originally thought. So we could see some dampening on prices. They won't necessarily be bad, but they certainly don't look like they're going back to the 2022 levels.
Yeah, the commentary I'd seen had indicated that just as a La Nina was a good thing in a sense. There was flooding and obvious problems here in Australia, but a wetter year here was good for us. Usually means a drought and bad year for people in parts of the Northern Hemisphere. You're saying the data from what USDA and others is indicating maybe it's not so bad?
Look, things are still going to be relatively tight. For example, in global wheat, for example, the USDA is saying we'll still be using more in the world than we'll be producing, but they are thinking there could be a record crop coming out of Russia. There could be a bigger crop than forecast coming out of the US as well. So the panic to a degree that was in the world last year isn't there at the moment.
Well, there's never any rest for farmers when it comes to, you've got to think about next season while you're harvesting this one. Seed decisions would be being made, I imagine, if they haven't been squirreled away already. And canola was the hot property in the last couple of years. What are we seeing on the canola market at the moment?
Look, in terms of canola, and as you say, absolutely, farmers are making decisions going forward for next year. If we look at what happened with Australia's canola crop last year, we had about 10% more planted. So it was in terms of the major crops, the one that saw the biggest increase planted. A lot of farmers going into that. Likely that there could be a reasonable amount of confidence in it going forward into the coming year as well. Things have been pretty enthusiastic and pretty hot in the canola market. There's no great reason to think that people will rotate out of canola in a major way back to wheat or barley as well. So it could well remain strong.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point because we're trying to hunt down a couple of experts, including from the Bureau of Meteorology, about where we're heading. Are we heading out of La Nina? Are we heading towards an El Nino? I thought I heard that the La Nina, the wetter conditions, created some headaches for canola farmers, but if it's not necessarily going to be as wet next cropping season, maybe it's a way to go 3 times in a row.
It could well be. Canola saw a reasonable increase. It was up about 4% last year in terms of the overall national crop, which in relative terms was bigger than the wheat increase and bigger than the barley increase. Obviously, a lot of these figures we're looking at are coming off the ABS December figures, and there's talk in the market there that once the final harvest finished, things could be even better again. So it'll be an interesting time for people looking to source their seed for what their winter crop's going to be.
Well, speaking of the figures, Viterra tells us that they hit some records when it came to Faber beans, breaking last year's record in a part of South Australia. On the pulses and that general broader front in cropping, what are you seeing of the trends heading into 2023?
Look, pulses were a really interesting one coming out of last year because when the big rains hit the East Coast particularly, there was a lot of talk about what the impact would be on the major crops, wheat and barley, and absolutely there was impact in New South Wales and to a degree parts of Queensland and Victoria as well. But it was the pulses that were hit to differing degrees. And it was really interesting in terms of Faber beans being hit in Victoria, although the South Australian crop was great. Pulses going into next year are also going to be impacted by some of the big trade issues as well. For example, there's a hell of a lot of lentils around at the moment, but maybe so much of a supply that's pushing prices down and having a dampening effect there. Same thing with chickpeas. There's some trade issues about getting the funding from the big exporters to get them in. So look, the pulse crop's likely to remain strong, but it'll be hoping for a lot less wet weather than it got last year.
Well, as if farmers didn't have enough to think about, there's some more food for thought for them as they consider planting decisions for this season. Thanks so much, Michael Whitehead from ANZ, for joining us again today.
Terrific. Thanks again, Ricky.